What if every catastrophic military defeat in history, from Rome's final collapse to France's six-week humiliation in 1940, from the Soviet disaster in Afghanistan to America's longest war, wasn't a failure of courage or equipment, but the predictable endpoint of an invisible six-stage cycle? A cycle that begins not on the battlefield, but decades earlier, in the halls of power where strategic clarity dies and institutional rot takes root. And what if the United States is currently deep into stage 4 of this exact pattern? For 30 years, I've studied military defeats that shocked the world. Not tactical losses, not Pyrrhic victories, but total, civilization-altering collapses where empires with overwhelming material superiority simply broke. And across centuries, across continents, across vastly different military technologies, the same six-stage pattern emerges with mathematical precision. Stage 1. Peak confidence following major victory. The empire has just won a decisive conflict. Military doctrine is canonized. The generals who won the last war become untouchable. Innovation stops because we know what works. Stage 2. Mission creep and strategic overextension. Flush with confidence, the empire's military commitments multiply. Small interventions become permanent deployments. The word temporary disappears from the vocabulary. Resources spread thin, but no one admits it. Stage 3. The professionalization trap. The citizen army transforms into a separate warrior caste. The gap between military and civilian society widens into a chasm. Politicians stop having children who serve. Strategic decisions are made by people with no personal stake in the outcome. Stage 4. Technological substitution for strategy. Facing overstretched forces and unclear objectives, leadership turns to technology as a magic solution. Precision weapons, drone warfare, surveillance systems, all deployed to avoid the hard questions about whether the mission itself makes sense. Stage 5. The unwinnable quagmire. The military finds itself in a conflict where victory has no definition. The enemy can't be defeated by conventional means, and withdrawal feels impossible because it would admit the entire enterprise was a mistake. Years turn into decades. Stage 6. The catastrophic revelation. Whether through sudden collapse or grinding withdrawal, the empire's military invincibility is shattered. Allies lose faith. Rivals are emboldened. The psychological damage exceeds the material losses. Let me show you how this pattern has played out, with brutal consistency, across 2,000 years. Rome's military collapse. Stage 1. Peak confidence, 180 to 235 AD. Rome at its maximum territorial extent. Pax Romana. The legions are considered invincible. Military doctrine hasn't changed in 2 centuries because it doesn't need to. Rome wins everything. Stage 2. Mission creep, 235 to 285 AD. The crisis of the 3rd century. Rome is now defending borders on every front simultaneously. Persians in the east, Germanic tribes across the Rhine and Danube, rebellions in Britain, invasions in North Africa. 26 emperors in 50 years, most killed by their own troops. The military is everywhere and effectively nowhere. Stage 3. The professionalization trap, 285 to 350 AD. The legions increasingly recruit from beyond Roman borders. Germanic foederati, Gothic mercenaries. By 350 AD, the Roman army defending Rome is no longer Roman. The gap between soldier and citizen is now ethnic, linguistic, cultural. Senators' sons become bureaucrats, not soldiers. Stage 4. Technological substitution, 350 to 400 AD. Rome responds to manpower shortages with fortification technology. The limes, massive defensive walls, elaborate border forts. Hadrian's Wall. The Danube fortifications. Static defense replacing mobile legions. The strategy becomes hold what we have because Rome can no longer project power. Stage 5. The unwinnable quagmire, 400 to 450 AD. Rome is fighting the same Gothic tribes for generations. Treaties are signed and broken. Victories change nothing. The Visigoths are defeated in 378 at Adrianople, except Rome loses and the emperor dies. Defeated, enemies are settled within Roman territory because Rome can't actually expel them. The military is fighting, always fighting, and achieving nothing permanent. Stage 6. The catastrophic revelation, 455 to 476 AD. When the Vandals sack Rome in 455 AD, there is barely a fight. When Odoacer deposes the last Western emperor in 476 AD, it's almost an administrative footnote. The reveal isn't that Rome's military is defeated, it's that it no longer functionally exists. The illusion shatters all at once. France 1940. Stage 1. Peak confidence, 1918 to 1930. France wins World War I. The French army is the most powerful land force in Europe. Their doctrine, methodical battle, firepower dominance, fixed fortifications, won the last war. Why change? Stage 2. Mission creep, 1930 to 1936. France guarantees Poland, Czechoslovakia, Belgium, Yugoslavia. The military is simultaneously preparing to defend France, protect allies across Eastern Europe, and maintain colonial commitments in Africa and Asia. Strategic commitments exceed realistic capability. Stage 3. The professionalization trap, 1930 to 1939. The French military becomes increasingly separate from civilian society. Universal conscription exists on paper, but training is perfunctory. Officer corps is aristocratic, closed, resistant to ideas from outside. Politicians like Daladier have never served. The generals who will fight in 1940 all made their reputations before 1918. Stage 4. Technological substitution, 1930 to 1940. Rather than rethink doctrine, France builds the Maginot Line, the most sophisticated fortification system ever constructed. Billions of francs. Subterranean cities. The strategy becomes the technology will save us. Meanwhile, new doctrines about mobile warfare and combined arms are dismissed because they don't fit the model that won last time. Stage 5. The unwinnable quagmire, 1939 to 1940. The phony war. 8 months where France is technically at war with Germany, but nothing happens. The military knows the strategic position is untenable, cannot defend both the Maginot Line and Belgium simultaneously, cannot match German rearmament, cannot coordinate with Britain effectively, but cannot articulate this to civilian leadership. So they wait, locked in place. Stage 6. The catastrophic revelation, May-June 1940. 6 weeks. The Third Republic, the world's greatest army, collapses in 42 days. Not because of lacking courage, French soldiers fought hard in isolated pockets, but because the entire system was optimized for fighting the previous war. When the Wehrmacht goes through the impassable Ardennes forest, French command structure simply locks up. The technology doesn't save them. The fortifications are irrelevant. The institutional rot, hidden during peacetime, becomes instantly visible. Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Stage 1. Peak confidence, 1945 to 1979. The Red Army defeated Nazi Germany. Soviet military doctrine is proven. The USSR is a superpower. Military interventions in Hungary, Czechoslovakia succeed quickly. Why would Afghanistan be different? Stage 2. Mission creep, 1979 to 1982. What begins as a limited intervention to support a friendly government becomes a full occupation. Initial deployment, 30,000 troops to secure cities. By 1982, 110,000 troops fighting a nationwide insurgency. No one planned for this. Each escalation is temporary. Each withdrawal date is postponed. Stage 3. The professionalization trap, 1970 to 1985. The Soviet military is increasingly isolated from civilian society. Officer corps is professionalized, careerist, politically connected. Conscripts serve but are not valued. Life expectancy for a Soviet conscript in Afghanistan is measured in months. Meanwhile, Politburo members' children get exemptions. Strategic decisions made by men whose sons will never deploy. Stage 4. Technological substitution, 1982 to 1986. Facing an enemy that melts into the population and mountains, the USSR turns to technological solutions. Attack helicopters, the Mi-24 becomes the symbol of the war. Sophisticated mine-clearing vehicles. Electronic warfare systems. Carpet bombing. The strategy becomes, we cannot defeat the insurgency politically, so we will defeat it through superior firepower. Villages are destroyed to save them. Stage 5. The unwinnable quagmire, 1982 to 1989. 7 years of one more fighting season. The Mujahideen cannot be defeated because they have sanctuary in Pakistan, popular support, and external funding. But withdrawal is impossible because it would mean admitting the entire intervention was a strategic error. So the war continues. Soviet forces control the cities during the day. The insurgents control everything else at night. There is no victory condition. There is only survival until rotation home. Stage 6. The Catastrophic Revelation, 1989. The withdrawal begins in May 1988, completed February 1989. 15,000 Soviet soldiers dead. Tens of thousands psychologically shattered. The USSR's reputation for invincibility, maintained since 1945, evaporates. Eastern European satellite states, watching the withdrawal, realize the Red Army is not invincible. Within 2 years, the entire Eastern Bloc dissolves. The Soviet Union itself collapses in 1991. Afghanistan didn't cause the collapse, but it revealed the institutional hollowness that made collapse inevitable. Now let's map this pattern onto the United States military, stage by stage, and identify precisely where we are. Stage 1. Peak confidence, 1991 to 2001. The First Gulf War. 100 hours of ground combat. Absolute victory. The Powell Doctrine, overwhelming force, clear objectives, exit strategy, is canonized. American military supremacy appears unchallengeable. Defense intellectuals declare the end of history. The doctrine is set. Innovation slows because we've achieved the optimal form. This is the peak. What comes after is the descent. Stage 2. Mission creep, 2001 to 2010. September 11th changes everything and nothing. Afghanistan is invaded to topple the Taliban, accomplished in weeks. But then, nation building. Then Iraq in 2003, a war sold on weapons of mass destruction that don't exist. Then Libya in 2011. Then Syria in 2014. Then back to Iraq. Then Somalia, Yemen, Niger, dozens of undeclared combat zones. By 2010, the U.S. military has special operations forces deployed in 134 countries. Not advisors. Combat forces. The word temporary disappears entirely. Each mission expands. Iraq alone. Initial projection was 80,000 troops for 6 months. Reality, 180,000 troops for 8 years, then more troops again in 2014. The 2001 authorization for use of military force, written to respond to 9/11, is still being used in 2024 to justify operations that have nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. A 23-year-old authorization for a war that was supposed to last months. This is textbook Stage 2. Strategic overextension hidden behind operational success metrics. Stage 3. The professionalization trap, 2001 present. This is where the pattern becomes unmistakable. In World War II, 12% of Americans served. The military was society. In Vietnam, still 2.5% of Americans served. By Iraq and Afghanistan, 0.5%. Today, 0.4%. The gap between military and civilian society is now a chasm. Since 2001, less than 1% of Americans have served in the military, but that military has been in continuous combat for 23 years. Congress has not formally declared war since 1942. Here's the critical data point. In 1975, 77% of Congress were veterans. In 2000, 33%. Today, 17%. The people making decisions about military deployment overwhelmingly have no personal military experience. Their children are statistically unlikely to serve. Only 13% of current service members come from families where a parent served, compared to 40% in the 1980s. The military has become a separate caste, an all-volunteer force that is, in practice, an economic draft. Recruits overwhelmingly come from households earning below the national median income. The wealthy discuss military intervention as an abstract policy option. The working class fights the wars. This is the Roman Federati. This is the French aristocratic officer corps. This is the Soviet careerist military. Stage 4. Technological substitution for strategy, 2010 present. And this is where we are now, deep into Stage 4. Facing unclear objectives in Afghanistan and Iraq, facing overstretched forces, facing a public that increasingly questions the missions, American leadership has turned systematically to technology as the solution. Drones. The signature of Stage 4. The U.S. conducted zero drone strikes in 2001. By 2010, over 100 strikes annually in Pakistan alone. By 2012, the U.S. is conducting drone operations in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Syria. The technology allows warfare without political cost, no American casualties, no draft, minimal public attention. The strategy becomes, we cannot win these wars politically, so we will manage them technologically. Every Taliban leader killed by drone strike is replaced. The insurgency continues. But the strikes continue because stopping would mean admitting they don't work. Precision weapons. The F-35 program, the most expensive weapons system in human history. $1.7 trillion over its lifetime. The justification, technological superiority, makes up for strategic confusion. We don't know exactly what we're fighting for in these 7 simultaneous conflicts, but we have 5th-generation fighters, so it's fine. Surveillance technology. The NSA collects data on billions of people globally. Metadata analysis. Pattern of life targeting. The fantasy. If we have enough information, we don't need strategic clarity. We can target the right people precisely enough that we don't need to define victory. Here's the tell. U.S. defense spending has increased 50% since 2000 in real terms. But readiness has declined. Equipment is aging. In 2018, less than half of Air Force fighter aircraft were mission-capable. In 2019, the Navy acknowledged it didn't have enough ships to meet operational commitments. The money goes to technology programs, not to the fundamentals. This is the Maginot Line. This is Rome's defensive walls. This is the USSR's Me-24 helicopters. Technology substituting for the hard question. What are we trying to accomplish, and is it achievable? Stage 5. The Unwinnable Quagmire, 2008 to 2021. Afghanistan. 20 years. The longest war in American history. The pattern is exact. U.S. forces topple the Taliban in 2001. Operationally brilliant, strategically unclear. Then, stay to build a stable government. Then, stay to prevent terrorist safe havens. Then, stay because withdrawal would mean the Taliban return. Each year, generals testify that progress is being made. Each year, the Taliban control more territory. By 2019, U.S. government's own internal assessment, the Afghanistan Papers, published by the Washington Post, reveals that senior officials knew for years the war was unwinnable but continued publicly claiming progress. Direct quote from a senior USAID official. We were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. We didn't know what we were doing. 3 presidential administrations. Bush, Obama, Trump, all campaign on ending the war. None do. Because withdrawal means admitting the entire 2-decade enterprise achieved nothing permanent. So the war continues. Not to win, to avoid losing. The U.S. military doesn't control Afghanistan. It controls bases and cities during daylight. The Taliban control the countryside and the night. There is no victory condition. There is only rotation schedules. This is the Soviet Union in 1985. This is Rome fighting the same Gothic tribes for generations. This is Stage 5. Stage 6, the catastrophic revelation, August 2021. And then it happens. The withdrawal from Afghanistan isn't a withdrawal. It's a collapse. Kabul falls faster than Saigon. The Afghan National Army, trained for 20 years by the U.S. at a cost of $83 billion, dissolves in 11 days. Not defeated. It simply stops existing. The images, U.S. helicopters evacuating the embassy. Afghans clinging to departing aircraft. The Taliban walking into the presidential palace unopposed. 20 years. $2 trillion. 2,400 American dead. Tens of thousands of Afghan civilian casualties. And in 11 days, it's as if the U.S. was never there. The psychological impact exceeds the material loss. The revelation isn't that the U.S. military lost. It's that the entire 20-year strategy was performative. We weren't building a nation. We were performing nation building. When the performance ended, there was nothing underneath. Allies notice. Taiwan watches the withdrawal and questions whether U.S. security commitments mean anything. So does South Korea. So does every NATO member. Rivals notice. Russia invades Ukraine 6 months later. Would they have risked it if the U.S. hadn't just demonstrated institutional exhaustion? This is Stage 6. Not because the U.S. military can't win battles. It absolutely can. but because the entire institutional framework has been revealed as strategically hollow. Here's what the pattern tells us about where this goes next. Every empire in Stage 6 faces the same choice. Does it learn from the catastrophic revelation, or does it deny the lesson and continue the pattern? Rome didn't learn. After each disaster, Roman leadership responded with the same solutions that caused the disaster. More mercenaries, more fortifications, more desperate treaties with the same enemies. The pattern continued until there was nothing left to continue. France in 1940 learned, but only after complete collapse. The reveal was so catastrophic, 6 weeks to surrender, that denial was impossible. The French Fourth Republic rebuilt from scratch. But the cost was occupation, collaboration, and psychological trauma that lasted generations. The Soviet Union learned, but too late. Gorbachev understood Afghanistan revealed systematic problems, not just military, but economic, political, ideological. He tried to reform the system. The system was unreformable. It collapsed instead. So what about the United States in 2024? Here's the evidence we're not learning. Evidence point 1. Continued overextension. After Afghanistan, has the U.S. reduced its military footprint? No. Special operations forces are still deployed in 80-plus countries. The 2022 National Defense Strategy commits the U.S. to defending Taiwan, maintaining forces in Europe for Ukraine, countering China in the Pacific, and maintaining Middle East presence. Commitments are increasing, not decreasing. Evidence point 2. Continued technological faith. The 2024 defense budget, $842 billion. Where does it go? The Next Generation Air Dominance Program. Hypersonic weapons. AI-enabled warfare systems. Autonomous drones. The same pattern. Technology will solve what strategy cannot. No one asks, technology for what objective? Evidence point 3. Continued civil-military gap. Military recruitment is in crisis. The Army missed its recruitment goals by 25% in 2023. Navy by 20%. Why? The recruitment pool. Americans aged 17 to 24 who are physically qualified, academically qualified, and morally qualified, has shrunk to 23%, down from 29% in 2013. The military and society are diverging further. Meanwhile, Congress is less veteran-heavy than any time since before World War II. The gap widens. Evidence point 4. No strategic reevaluation. Not one senior military or civilian leader has been held accountable for Afghanistan. Not one. The same generals who testified for 20 years that progress is being made received promotions. The same defense contractors who built the Afghan National Army that dissolved in 11 days received new contracts. The institutions that failed learned nothing because they faced no consequences for failure. This is the pattern continuing. But here's where it gets darker. Because Stage 6 isn't the end. Stage 6 is the reveal that sets up the next crisis. The historical pattern shows what comes after military revelation. Rival powers test the weakened empire immediately. This isn't speculation. This is historical law. After Rome's disaster at Adrianople in 378 AD, the Visigoths immediately intensified their invasions. They knew Rome couldn't stop them. After France's collapse in 1940, Germany immediately pivoted to invade the Soviet Union. French defeat revealed that blitzkrieg worked, which emboldened the invasion of Russia. After the USSR withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989, Eastern European nations immediately began pushing for independence. Soviet military weakness revealed in Afghanistan meant they could challenge Moscow without fear of tanks. After the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan in August 2021, Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. 6 months. China accelerated military pressure on Taiwan. Iran became more aggressive with proxy forces. Not coincidence. Historical pattern. And here, the escalation dynamic. Each test forces the weakened empire to choose between two catastrophic options. Respond forcefully and risk another quagmire that exposes more weakness, or don't respond and confirm the weakness everyone suspects. The U.S. now faces this exact choice with multiple rivals simultaneously. Taiwan. If China invades, does the U.S. intervene militarily? If yes, potential war with a nuclear power and an economy that can match U.S. production. If no, every U.S. alliance becomes worthless overnight. Japan, South Korea, Philippines all realize American security guarantees are performative. Ukraine. Continue supporting Ukraine against Russia indefinitely? U.S. has committed over $100 billion. Ukrainians are fighting heroically, but the war is grinding into the same pattern as Afghanistan. No clear victory condition, no exit strategy, just continuous support to avoid losing. Or abandon Ukraine and confirm to every U.S. ally that support is transactional and time-limited. Middle East. Iran is months from nuclear breakout capability. Does the U.S. conduct military strikes to prevent it? If yes, another Middle East war, probably requiring ground forces eventually. If no, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states pursue their own nuclear programs because they see and rely on U.S. security umbrella. The pattern shows what happens next. The empire, trying to prove it's not weak, overcommits to a new conflict. This confirms the weakness by revealing the overextension, which invites more challenges, which forces more overcommitment. This is how Rome fell, not in one catastrophic battle, but through a cascade of crises where each response to weakness created more weakness. This is how France fell. The commitment to defend too many allies with too few forces meant they couldn't defend any ally effectively. This is how the USSR fell. Afghanistan revealed institutional rot that had been hidden for decades, and the revelation triggered a cascade of challenges the system couldn't absorb. The United States is entering this cascade now, deep in Stage 4, having just experienced the Stage 6 revelation, facing multiple simultaneous challenges from rivals who watched Afghanistan very carefully. So what does the pattern tell us to expect in the next 5 years? If the pattern holds, and it has held across 2 millennia, we should expect. Prediction 1. Another strategic commitment that becomes a quagmire. The U.S. will commit to defending a position or ally that seems manageable initially, but metastasizes into another unwinnable long-term deployment. The most likely candidate, Taiwan. China's timeline for reunification is accelerating. If they move in the next 3 years, the U.S. faces the choice: intervene or abandon. Based on the pattern, the U.S. intervenes. Based on the pattern, it becomes another Afghanistan, not in the sense of insurgency, but in the sense of a commitment that cannot achieve its objectives, cannot be sustained indefinitely, but cannot be abandoned without catastrophic credibility loss. Prediction 2. Continued faith in technological solutions. Rather than fundamentally rethinking strategy, U.S. leadership will double down on next-generation weapon systems, AI-enabled warfare, autonomous systems, hypersonic weapons. Each will be sold as the innovation that changes the game. None will address the fundamental problem: unclear strategic objectives. The F-35 today is the Maginot Line tomorrow. Prediction 3. Accelerating civil-military gap. Military recruitment continues declining. The gap between the 0.4% who serve and the 99.6% who don't continues widening. This creates a dangerous dynamic. The public is disconnected enough that leadership can pursue military ventures without political cost, but the military lacks the manpower to execute effectively. The result: more reliance on technology, more drone warfare, more special operations, more contractors. The empire's military becomes something done to others, not by citizens. Prediction 4. A second catastrophic revelation within 10 years. Afghanistan was the Stage 6 reveal. The pattern suggests there will be another, larger one. It could be Taiwan, a commitment to defend that proves unenforceable. It could be a multi-front crisis where the U.S. discovers it cannot, in fact, fight simultaneous wars in Europe and Asia as doctrine claims. It could be internal, a domestic crisis that reveals the military cannot stabilize its own country. Whatever form it takes, the pattern suggests another moment where the gap between U.S. military reputation and U.S. military reality becomes undeniable. But here's the most important thing the pattern reveals: this isn't inevitable. Every stage of this pattern is a choice. Stage 2 happened because leadership chose expanding commitments. Stage 3 happened because society chose to create a separate warrior caste rather than maintain a citizen military. Stage 4 is happening because it's politically easier to buy new weapons systems than to ask hard strategic questions. The pattern is strong, but it's not deterministic. It can be broken, but only by fundamentally rethinking the framework. What would breaking the pattern look like? It would mean asking, what are America's actual vital interests, not what interests can the military theoretically reach. Vital means. Without this, the nation cannot survive. By that definition, the U.S. has perhaps three vital interests: territorial integrity, free navigation of global commons, and preventing hostile powers from dominating Eurasia. Everything else is desirable or traditional, not vital. It would mean matching commitments to capability. If the U.S. commits to defending Taiwan, that means being prepared for a full-scale conventional war with China, including accepting tens of thousands of American casualties, economic decoupling that shrinks U.S. GDP by 5 to 10%, and the possibility of nuclear escalation. Are we prepared for that? If not, the commitment is performative, and performative commitments create the quagmires. It would mean rebuilding the connection between military and society. Either a draft, unpopular but effective at forcing strategic discipline because politicians whose children serve don't casually vote for war, or a fundamental restructuring of recruitment to ensure the military represents all of society, not just the bottom half economically. It would mean accountability. The generals who testified for 20 years that Afghanistan was making progress should not have received promotions. The think tanks that advocated for the Iraq War should not still be shaping policy. The defense contractors whose equipment failed should not receive automatic contract renewals. Without accountability, institutions cannot learn. Most importantly, it would mean accepting that the post-Cold War moment of American unilateral supremacy is over. Not because of decline. The U.S. economy is still the world's largest, U.S. technology still the most advanced, but because the world has changed. China is a peer competitor. Russia is a spoiler with regional ambitions. The Middle East is unmanageable. Accepting this doesn't mean retreat. It means strategic discipline. It means choosing where to engage and where to let regional powers balance each other. Rome didn't do this. They kept treating every border threat as existential until they had no resources left. France didn't do this in 1940. They committed to defending allies they couldn't reach with forces they didn't have. The USSR didn't do this. They stayed in Afghanistan for a decade trying to prove they hadn't made a mistake. The United States can do this. But the pattern suggests it won't. Because breaking the pattern requires admitting the last 20 years were largely wasted. Requires telling the public that their children shouldn't die for commitments that aren't vital. Requires defense contractors to build less, not more. Requires politicians to admit they don't know how to solve certain international problems militarily. These are hard truths. The pattern continues because the easy path is to keep doing what you redoing and hope technology makes it work. But history is clear. Hope is not a strategy. Technology is not a strategy. Strategy is strategy. And without it, even the most powerful military in history follows the pattern toward catastrophic revelation. We are at stage 4. We've had the stage 6 reveal in Afghanistan. The rivals are testing. The commitments are expanding. The civil-military gap is widening. The faith in technology is absolute. Every indicator points the same direction. The pattern is clear, for those willing to look. The question isn't whether the United States will experience another catastrophic military revelation in the next decade. Based on 2,000 years of historical precedent, the answer is almost certainly yes. The question is whether that revelation will force the strategic discipline that could have prevented it, or whether it will simply be another step in a longer pattern of decline. History suggests the latter. But history is made by choices. And we're still choosing. The 6-stage pattern of military defeat is playing out again. Same stages. Same warnings. Same opportunities to change course. Rome didn't take them. France didn't take them. The USSR didn't take them. We're at stage 4. The pattern is in motion. The pattern doesn't ask if you believe in it. It simply executes. Rome ignored it. France ignored it. The Soviet Union ignored it. All 6 fell in the exact same sequence. Stage 5 is already beginning. You have perhaps 5 years to prepare for what comes next. If this analysis disturbed you, good. It should. Subscribe for the next one. The pattern doesn't wait. Neither should you.